Right, so for the second part of today's lesson, we're going to be talking about some of the changes that matter can undergo. So there's two different ways that we can change matter, one of those being physical changes, the other being chemical. So if something goes through a physical change, you're usually just changing how it looks, but you're not changing what it's actually made of. So some examples of this, melting and boiling. So if we take the example of ice. So ice is just frozen water. So if you melt ice, it's still water. And if you freeze the water, it's still H2O. You're not changing what it is. If you boil the water goes into the air and becomes water vapor. So it's still water. It's still H2O, even though it looks totally different. So same thing with breaking and cutting something. If you break glass, it's still glass. So some pictures of that. We have the broken glass. Even when you break it into a bunch of pieces, it's still glass. So that would be a physical change. Right here with the candle wax starts as a solid, and then once you light the candle, it melts and becomes a liquid, but it's still candle wax. So you're melting it, it stays candle wax, and then eventually it kind of unmelts and stays as candle wax. You rip paper, it's still paper. It's still made of the same thing. Same thing what we talked about earlier with the water. So the other type of change that matter can undergo is called a chemical change. So when this happens, this means a chemical reaction is actually happening. So when you're doing an experiment, there are certain indicators that tell you that a chemical reaction or a chemical change is happening. So anything that undergoes a temperature change, produces bubbles, gets cloudy, or changes colors, usually that is an indicator that a chemical reaction is going on and you're changing what the substance is. So a few examples of that, we'll take the match for example. So anything that burns is going to be a chemical change. So the wood that's burning right here is made of carbon and hydrogen. So when that reacts with oxygen and it burns, that wood is being converted into CO2 and water. So it's no longer wood. After you burn something, it becomes something else. Another way that's kind of helpful to think about this is when something goes through a chemical change, it's usually impossible to change it back. So you're never going to be able to unburn this piece of wood. So same thing with cooking an egg. You're actually changing what the egg is, and you're changing it from something you can't eat into something that you can. Same thing when a nail rusts. So if a nail is made of iron and reacts with oxygen, you create iron oxide. So you're creating something new in a chemical change. So it's no longer made of the same thing it was made of before rusting.